Hi everyone, so yeah, my name is Mark. I'm going to share a story today of building an app for an agency in Farringdon that I did over the summer. It's a 6-7 week project, so quite a short one. My first commercial React Native project, so it was definitely interesting. The point of the campaign, it was for a fundraising campaign largely run in Australia and New Zealand. The point was to eat like a refugee for a week, which was interesting. So a bit about me to start. So I grew up in the Microsoft land, so C# developer, web developer, full stack for over 10 years. And then I always kind of liked apps when they came about. So I eventually jumped over to apps using the Xamarin technology. Anybody heard of Xamarin? It's the Microsoft stuff for cross-platform apps. So that was pretty good. That was learning the underlying native platforms, but just in a C# flavor, which is good because I still, now that I've left it behind, I still think C# is a great language. So the last sort of 5 or 6 years I've been at justgiving.com, until earlier this year that was. So I've been spent a lot of time in the kind of social giving space. And then earlier this year I left Just Giving and moved into React Native and also into freelancing. So I'm a freelance app developer now, and of course every app developer has their own $1 billion app at home. So I'm also an entrepreneur. And if you want to tweet me, that's my handle, Mark Gibaud. So what is the Ration challenge? As I say, it's primarily an Australasian fundraising campaign. It's been going about 4 or 5 years now. It takes place during what is called Refugee Week, which 2018 was the 17th to the 23rd of June. So that's a global day to raise awareness specifically for refugees fleeing Syria. The Ration challenge, so these boxes actually get into camps in Jordan are given to Syrian refugees. The campaign has been primarily or only web until 2018, when the agency decided they wanted to do an iOS and Android app, a companion app for taking the challenge, and we can get into that, what we built in a second. So the team was, as I say, I met these guys, agency in Farringdon, specializing in the kind of charity sector. It was primarily myself for about 5 weeks, and then I was joined just to get us over the line by 2 React web developers. They were obviously a React native code base, so they were able to contribute pretty quickly once I put the foundations down. And then we had a project manager and a QA. And that was it. The project manager was really good at testing as well, so that'll become apparent later on. A bit like justgiving.com in the UK, there's a platform out in Australasia called Razely. So this is kind of a fundraising platform where people create pages, receive donations. It's got a great API. It's got webhooks on those APIs that we used for push notifications, etc. So that powered the app largely. And then, as I say, the point of the campaign was to sign up, become a Ration challenger, live on rations. You get a box like this for your first few meals, your first 3 or 4 meals. And then if you download the app and engage online, you get recipe ideas, and you have to make your own kind of rations for the remainder of the week. So that was the point of the app. So we built, as I say, we built this in about 6 or 7 weeks. We had challenge tracking, so basically, track your own journey, ask for donations, share to Facebook to ask for donations. As you get more donations and kind of progress through levels, you get more rewards that you can add to your rations. There were recipes, ideas, chances to engage with the community, everybody else doing the challenge. Take part in some polls, look at leaderboards, and then if you were raising in a team, you could see how your team was doing. You could see how your team was doing, the individuals in your team, and also how your team was doing against other teams. That was all Razely data that we put in the app. So there were donation notifications as well, leaderboards, as I said, recipe ideas, social sharing, and this app eventually went out to about 5,000 users, Android and iOS, for that week. You might think you might ask whether we had donating in the app. It turns out due to licensing, and I know this from Just Giving, due to licensing from Apple, they don't actually allow in-app donations unless you're using Apple Pay, so it's donate with Apple Pay, just because they don't want to take 30% of an in-app donation. So that's a bit more complex, so that didn't make the app, it being 7 weeks. So the tech stack used, fairly stock standard these days, I think, not a big surprise to anybody here. So React Native, obviously. React Navigation, so I remember looking and seeing about 4 or 5 different options for React Native navigation solutions. It looked like React Navigation was the best one then, and I think it's emerged as kind of the de facto standard, certainly getting the most. Oh, some faces. That would be an interesting discussion over a beer. And then Redux and Redux Thunk. I think of all the things in React land, Redux is probably one of the more controversial ones, but certainly an app on this scale is it was a good choice, I think. And then for some of the back-end stuff, AWS Amplify for push notifications assisted by Lambda functions. We had a Lambda function that would receive the webhook from Razely once somebody got a donation on their page, and they could get in-app notifications and come back into the app and see their updated total, etc. And then also MongoDB Atlas. So Atlas is MongoDB's database as a service product. Pretty awesome as well for any database nerds in the audience. Yeah, that stuff combined well to do the push notification stuff, which can be sometimes quite complicated. So on to lessons learned. So I'll go through some lessons. These are like highly opinionated lessons. Sentry.io and not CRASHLYTICS. So I tried to get CRASHLYTICS going, failed miserably. Bitrise, not NEVERCODE. So these are tools to help with the distribution to app stores and to test groups of users, etc. We'll go through kind of what I was supposed to use and what I'd like to use. And then, yeah, so React Navigation and Redux, it was a bit weird at first because having worked on the native platforms where you're very deliberate about navigation, you say UI navigation controller .push navigation controller to get to the next screen, or maybe if some of you have worked with MVVM frameworks where you just kind of show a view model and whatever the view that is attached to that view model is shown, you're still very deliberate about how you move around the app, but obviously in React Navigation and Redux, it's all just actions to the store. And then the final lesson learned is that in 6 weeks you don't get time to write unit tests, but with some good manual testing, that doesn't actually matter. But now I'm on a code base with 100% coverage, so don't scream at me too loudly. So one cool thing about basically using React Navigation and running your navigation through the state, through the store, is the ability to apply middleware. So React Native doesn't actually give you events for when the app comes on, like backgrounds and foregrounds, and so some of this, if any of you have done native development, you get explicit events when the app does anything really. There's nothing that you're really caught out with, and the same with like transitioning screen to screen. There's easy stuff to hook into on the native platforms, but it's a bit more tricky with React Native. But if you take a step back and understand that all of your navigation is just actually state changes in the store, it becomes pretty easy to just apply a piece of middleware. So along with, say, Redux Thunk, I've got a screen tracking util here, and this is almost completely from the docs. And basically, you can see that it's a piece of middleware from the next and the action. If it's not a navigation action, just execute the next function in the chain, in the middleware chain, and otherwise dig into the actual navigation slice of the global state, and then get some details to eventually send to Google Analytics. So that's the kind of win that you can get with completely, doing things completely differently to native platforms sometimes. So CRASHLYTICS, who use CRASHLYTICS in their apps? Yeah, I thought you might. Okay, you're not going to like what I say next. So I tried to integrate CRASHLYTICS. If we kind of take a look at the last few years of CRASHLYTICS. So as I kind of found out the hard way, CRASHLYTICS started in 2010, 2011 or something. Eventually acquired by Twitter. Twitter decides to roll CRASHLYTICS into Fabric with a couple of other things like answers and different solutions for different problems. Twitter gets bored, or I don't know what happens, but sells it to Google. Google kind of wonders what to do with it, and then not quite, but rolls it into Firebase, that should say. Sorry, Google acquires Fabric and rolls it into Firebase. And then obviously as a React Native developer, you're coming to this through the React Native SDK and getting that up and running. It was very kind of obvious to me all the lineages or levels of ancestry that you had to grapple with, especially with regards to documentation. So the documentation is kind of everywhere. We're a little bit incomplete. It turns out that different things want Firebase for different reasons. So you can use AWS Cognito for just a user store that wants Firebase, and then end up needing a different version of Firebase for push notifications, which you need for Android push notifications. So yeah, it didn't really work. So it led to a lot of pain. And what I recommend these days, especially for React Native apps, is to stop using CRASHLYTICS, and check out something called Sentry.io. So this is pretty popular with React.js developers, but I think late last year, early this year, rolled out good support for React Native. So with some choice information redacted, this is a screenshot of the app I'm working on at the moment. You can see like a ton of information in the Sentry dashboard for various device properties and whatnot. If you get your source maps uploaded properly, which is pretty trivial, then you can get proper code inspection there for stuff that makes sense. This is the breadcrumbs feature. So in the same way that I had that screen tracking middleware, you can set up middleware to post a breadcrumb to Sentry indicating your state transitions, your action dispatches. For those of you who use Axios, Axios has got interceptors that you can kind of tag onto any kind of request or response. Again, you can use middleware to give Sentry all your network requests. Obviously, only post your body if you've got non-PII or sensitive information in there, and you're allowed to. And then if we carry on further down, more information about time zones and everything that might help you debug. And then right at the bottom, you can even attach additional data of your own. So we've put in our last action, how long they've been alive, which is sometimes like, if it's the first few actions, then you want to know that it's early on in a user's journey, and the entirety of the store. We don't store a lot of stuff in our Redux store, so that shouldn't get too big. So Sentry is kind of what I'd choose to use first for debugging app issues. The next one is NEVERCODE. So has anybody heard of NEVERCODE? I'd never heard of NEVERCODE before I'd started at this place. So Israeli startup, I believe. Yeah, so they were already using it, so we kind of I just picked it up there and used it straight away. But it turns out that the React Native support wasn't really quite there. It wasn't smooth to use React Native. It was supported, but not that smooth. It had uptime issues, which is not what you want when nervous project managers are like they have a meeting tonight at 12 o'clock because the client is in Australia and they want a new version of the app right now. And then, yeah, it's not really configurable or programmable. You basically choose whatever they have there, and if they don't cater for your specific use case, something simple as upping the version number, the build number of an app, which everybody wants to do at build time, you had to, do it via a bash script and then upload the bash script, which is a bit stupid, really. So, has anybody heard of Bitrise? So Bitrise is kind of what I choose now. The build steps are all open source, as you might know. That means there are new ones added all the time. The existing ones are well maintained, and all the popular build steps that you want to do with an app. So uploading to Bitrise itself, uploading to the app stores, even running advanced scenarios like UI testing in AWS's app farm. That stuff's all catered for. It's all there. A relatively new feature is you can now chain build jobs. So if you've got one job for compilation and delivery of the app. You can then have a separate one that depends on the success of that first one to go off and take that app and do UI testing, if you're into that sort of thing. And I also like to point out when companies have good funding and have good investors, so they Y Combinator funded and they got $6 million a couple of years ago now, which means that the product is going to continue to progress over the next several months. So that's what I choose for building and delivering apps. So I thought I'd end off with a couple of tips. So has anybody heard of REACTOTRON? Okay, so old news to some of you. But this is basically a Mac desktop app that you can install, and it's basically a React Native debugger on steroids. So once you hook it up and do kind of the minimum of config, you can get all of your your actions dispatched logged there. You can get custom logging as well. Again, with the Axios interceptors, you can see your API requests. You can dig into the response payloads and the headers. That's all super important to be able to do, especially in a sequential fashion like that, to understand like what your app is doing, and often what it's doing wrong, in other words. Another thing you can do on this tab here is actually paste into this box here a screenshot of your mock-up from a designer. And that actually overlays onto your simulator, so you can see kind of basically use this to get pixel perfect between what you've actually coded in your React Native view and what your designer has designed in InVision. So that's super useful, especially for phones of different sizes these days. And some of the conversations that I've had at React Native Monthly meetups before have been like, yeah, I've come to kind of check out React Native. I'm not sure if it's ready for prime time yet. I'm not sure if I should choose to learn native platforms, or if it's like a non-developer, choose to invest in a company to build for the native platforms or React Native. Like, how ready is it? And for those of you, has anybody heard of GYROSCOPE, the app? You've pretty much heard of it. So good that that's news, because if you have any doubts about how awesome an app that you can actually create with React Native, download and check out this app. It's a like body tracking app, so it tracks your sleep, your time online through like rescue time, your heart rate through your Apple Watch, and a bunch of other things, your steps, all the obvious stuff. But the way it presents this data back to you, it's the best UI that I've ever seen on any iOS app, React Native or otherwise. So definitely check that out. It's like 6 guys in San Francisco. Again, it's amazing. There's probably quite a lot of advanced React Native code in there, but it is React Native code nonetheless. So check that out. I don't think there's anything wrong with CRASHLYTICS if you set it up like 10 times already, but if you haven't set it up for the first time, then getting it running in React Native, again, it was something that I added after I had already added Amplify, which had added Firebase, and then I needed to dive into build.gradle to make different versions of Firebase pulled in for these different CRASHLYTICS wanted one and Amplify wanted another, and then so Sentry is kind of just easier to get going and kind of shows you the info, because apps these days don't actually crash that much, right? Like 2011 apps were crashing. You wanted to know like the Apple build logs for that crash and symbolification, whatever it is. But these days, like we should mostly protecting against actual crashes. You kind of want caught JavaScript errors or caught exceptions. You want to report those. You ideally want to report those within like an event stream of stuff that you've reported yourself, either like analytics events or state changes, dispatched actions, API requests and responses, that type of thing. I couldn't get it working with CRASHLYTICS. So another one I hear of a lot more these days is Microsoft App Center as well. That does a bunch of different things. But I've used Hockey App before for the error reporting, and they've rolled Hockey App's functionality into App Center. So App Center is probably one to look at as well. So the main reason I jumped from Xamarin to React Native was the speed and the iteration speed of React Native. So sort of end of last year, beginning of this year, Xamarin started getting support for like live reload type stuff, but for non-complex apps, and it wasn't really reloading the whole app. It was just reloading a UI layer. So they knew that was important, and they probably worked on it quite a lot for now. But the speed of getting to iOS and Android when you're sketching out lots of views, like if you've got an app and you immediately over the next 2 weeks have to write 10 screens, like the speed of iteration of React Native was really, really compelling. Xamarin I'd still pick to choose over. I'd still choose Xamarin if you were working on some of the sort of further reaches of the API, the native platforms, and you kind of wanted first level access to those specific APIs. Right now, if new APIs come out, so a good example is the React Native text box will not yet, or does not yet, support the iOS 12 feature of getting an OTP code, a text code like the guy was talking about, and one click put that OTP code into the text box that you are trying to log in to. So we have to kind of wait now a month for the next React Native version if it's in the next version. So you've got this layer that you have to wait to catch up, right? So if you want to get rid of that, then Xamarin might be a better option, and it's still a compelling product. But yeah, for that's kind of an edge use case. In terms of the Microsoft thing, it's really interesting. So I left Microsoft, and then soon at where I am now, we're going to go TypeScript. We already use App Center. We already use VS Code. So the new Microsoft 2.0 is kind of popping up in all sorts of places. And yeah, if you use the best tool for the job, you'll end up using Microsoft stuff, which is cool. And that's all I had. So thanks very much, and you can tweet me on that handle.